Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Kena, Bridge of Spirits. I played on the PS5, it's also available on the PS4 and PC. So let's start with the story. You play as Kena, who is a young spirit guide, and her goal as a spirit guide is to help guide spirits on to the afterlife. And in this world, they have this culture where they carve masks for the dead, and as the mask decays, it helps guide the spirit on. But when a mask isn't decaying, it means the spirit is staying, and they're not willing to leave yet, and they can become corrupted. Now, Kena goes to this strange land to basically see what's going on, because there is this massive corruption going on. She's trying to get to this main spirit tree, and she's basically just trying to help the world, essentially. Because when they don't move on, when this, corruption spreads, it starts to poison the land. Fortunately for Kena, she does meet some other characters along the way to help her. And I gotta say, while I feel like the story could be a bit stronger, it's enjoyable, and the world has such interesting lore that it works well together and it keeps me going, kept me motivated. Now let's get into the audio, and the first thing I'm going to say is I love the music in this game. I was really impressed by the music. I think it worked well in combat, when you're exploring the world, just any and all times. I think the music is fantastic. But I think the mixing is a little off. I had to turn my music volume down. I basically keep my speakers at the same volume at all times, and this was definitely way too loud at times, so I had to dial down the music in-game because I didn't want to screw with the other settings. As for the voiceover work, I think it's good for the most part. There were definitely lines specifically that came from Kena that I noticed that seemed to fall flat. There didn't seem to be much affect on them. It really seemed like somebody was just straight up reading things and not necessarily always trying to put any emphasis behind them. But it wasn't every single line, it wasn't every single time, so it did stand out when it happened. As for the sound effects in the world, I really like the sound effects in the world. I think they fit with all the kind of mystic stuff that's going on, as well as the nature stuff. I think it works with the combat. I thought the sound effects were very well done. The only thing in the audio that really disappointed me was that there were lines that were delivered and they fell flat. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is a third-person platformer RPG element-riddled game. I'm gonna keep adding it because it's a thing. So what I mean by that is, yes, there is platforming, puzzle solving, there is combat, and there is, of course, leveling up. You get XP, essentially, from the combat, as well as completing tasks around the world, like small tasks, not necessarily always big, bombastic tasks. Things that would bring, spiritual balance to the world. But it allows you to upgrade your abilities in combat, which I'm not going to get into right away. I want to first address the gameplay element, the rot, which I guess flows into the story as well, and I probably should have mentioned it there, but they're these adorable little creatures that they help you in combat, they help you solve puzzles, you can put funny little hats on them, but they are the kind of key unique element to this game because you can command them, you can use them, and you can use them in combat, you can use them in all sorts of different things, and I thought that was cool and it's important. So now let's flow into the combat, where I will address the adorable little rot as well. The combat starts out honestly boring, and I was really very disappointed in it at first. It does take a while for it to grow into something worth being. At first, the combat was so uninspired that I was thinking this would probably be a better movie than game. But as it goes on, as you gain new abilities and as new enemies are introduced, you really do get into the combat even more. And there are some of the bosses. Honestly, the bosses kind of drew me in because they are challenging, but you figure out the pattern and you can beat them. But that being said, I did enjoy the combat once I got more abilities and they started introducing enemies to mix it up. And that goes for the platforming as well. At first it was a lot of really basic platformer stuff, solve some pretty easy jumping puzzles, solve some stuff like that. But then as you get more abilities, they make them more complicated and it works. As for the rot's role in combat, they can, in certain fights, there are these, what were they, dewdrop type things, I can't remember, that basically bind the rot together into this creature, and you can use that creature in combat. Or you can use the rot to tie up enemies in combat, which allows you to get some hits in, hit their weak points, etc. As for puzzle solving, that creature that the rot come together to form can be used there as well. And honestly, the part that really impressed me was when there were areas where you would be separated from the rot and have to use only the rot in combat. And I really liked that because it did start to mix things up even more so. But all of that being said, I do have to put in my negative about the combat, and that is that there were definitely times where I don't feel like the systems worked. There were times where I could launch my rot against an enemy, and even though I had more charges, it wouldn't let me then later. And it didn't make sense. Like, there weren't things that really were letting me know, oh, you can't launch your rot at this time, but you can at this time. And there were definitely times where I felt like I blocked or dodged, and you gotta figure out the dodge mechanic. It is one of those things where, like, it's not good for getting distance, it really is a dodge. And once I figured that out, that I shouldn't be using it to try and get away from enemies so much as to avoid their attacks, it worked better and I liked it more, but that's never really well explained because there are so many games where dodge is get away rather than actually avoid attack. I mean, it follows that open world platformer idea. There are certain areas, you unlock them as you go, there are puzzles there are, you know, all these different side things and collectibles and little things like that. And I gotta say, the game was bigger than I was expecting, but it's also not so big that, you know, it feels overwhelming. Let's get into the controls, and I feel like for the most part the controls work well. I won't say they are flawless because there were a few times where I felt like I hit dodge and should have dodged but did not, or I hit the shield and the shield didn't trigger. So I will say I have that complaint, but like 90% of the time, the buttons are very responsive. When you attack, you will attack. When you use a heavy attack, you'll attack. When you shoot off the rot, you know, the buttons generally respond. It feels more like a gameplay issue most of the time, but there were times where it felt like a control issue as well. As for movement and, you know, camera control, I think those work very well. So I didn't have any real complaint with that part. Now let's talk about the graphics and visuals. And I think it's a beautiful game. It feels like playing a Disney movie, honestly. That's the best way I can describe it. And like when the rot are around, they're just the most adorable thing ever. And putting them in adorable hats is also adorable. I mean, there's not a lot of other words you can use to describe them that don't involve adorable or cute or things like that, because they are. But I like the design, I like how expressive they can be, I like the fact that you can sit down with the rot. This is literally something you can do, and like have one dance on your head or give it a kiss, or, you know, I think that's cool that they put that in there because it shows that the rot are real things in this world. And having those interactions with them are things that people would actually do if those were real creatures. But beyond that, I think the world is just really well done. When the corruption is there, it gets dark and it gets like gross looking, and they do a great job illustrating that. Once you've cleared out the corruption or areas where there is no corruption, you can really see how bright and beautiful the world is, how colorful it is, how neat the architecture is, just how cool the landscape is overall. But then there are times where you're like kind of seeing these spirit memories. And those are like, can be dark and scary, and they just add a whole nother element to it, as well as you can look through like the spirit masks at times, which is a fun visual thing, and it can give you clues for puzzles and stuff. So I think they did clever things visually that tie into the gameplay. But it also works with this beautiful world and lore that they're building. I like the character designs too. I think the character designs are fantastic, and I think they work, once again, very well with the world and lore. I think there's just the right amount of like really cartoony appearance, but then for like fabrics and grass and things like that, they put the right amount of detail in there. Just overall, I was really impressed visually with this game. I really love the art style. I think it's fantastic from that standpoint. So to wrap this up, I actually really enjoyed this game. Admittedly, like I said earlier, when I started, I thought this would be a better movie or mini-series or something like that, but the gameplay grew and evolved and it became something worth playing. So I gotta say, this is definitely worth the money. I really enjoyed the experience. I fully recommend this game to PlayStation owners. Or if you got a PC, you know, whatever, I recommend this game. Okay, in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, was there ever a game where you thought the character's name was pronounced one way and then you later found out that it was definitely not pronounced that way? Because I definitely thought it was going to be Kenna or Kina. It's Kana. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.